Well, hello everyone. My name is Ted Hayes. I'm co-founder of Pythia Cyber, and today we have our other two co-founders. Please introduce yourselves.
Well, I'm John Sebas. I'm the one of the three of us that's probably had the most career dissatisfaction with trying to help people improve their cybersecurity and watching the challenges of putting it into practice in action. And that's why the three of us think we've actually figured out how to address those problems.
I'm Brendan Hemingway. I'm the one of us who has spent the most time helping IT people solve their actual problems. So I like to say John's about policy and management understanding, and I'm about configuring pieces of hardware that people desperately hope will do more for them than they will.
Well,
Yeah,
that
I think
leaves
that's
me.
actually a really good lead in for what we're talking about today. Countermeasures that you hope will do more for you than they actually can. So there's some reality-based thinking that has to happen here. Is that right, Ted?
Well, that's right. And my role in this is to talk with managers, leaders, and everybody in the organization about how to segue from being an organization that is not risk aware to being one that manages its risk proactively. You think about what you've got at stake as someone in that organization. You handle credit card information, patient information, photos of people. You've got address information. You've got property that other people want, or you got property that could get out of your control through forces that are out to get it and you don't even know why. It's not because you're undeserving. It's not because uh, you're sloppy. It's because you haven't made cybersecurity your job in the organization. It's been delegated throughout the IT group, which is kind of normal. But what we want to do is segue you to thinking as a risk manager. How can you ensure the continuity of this business? How can you ensure that when you use the systems in your organization, they're going to be secure, they're going to work, and they're going to provide value for the people who are your business partners, your financiers, your board, your customers. Ultimately, cybersecurity is about you creating value in your organization. And that's a mind shift that a lot of people have to take. And we've been thinking a lot about this, and uh, John and Brennan have some particular thoughts, and please share them with us.
Well, Ted, let me actually start by queuing up Brendan on this because I think you talk about a segue or a shift or an evolution or whatever, where cybersecurity is um, the responsibility of the management of a company, and it's based on uh, managing risk versus what is often, as you said, very normal, sort of a predecessor um, phase where security is sort of the grudgingly held responsibility of the IT organization. So, Brendan, I'm wondering if you could help us out here by providing one or two examples of where an IT organization is doing some IT security as distinct from a holistic cybersecurity, and where there may be, as you started out a moment ago, unrealistic expectations. And if we can maybe identify a couple unrealistic expectations, maybe we can move on to trying to explain why literally every organization on the planet is vulnerable to cyber attack, large, small, spending jabillions of dollars or not. So you think you can identify a couple of those factors for us?
Sure. One of the, I mean, as the old joke goes, you know, with the drunk looking for his car keys, why are you looking under the lamppost if that's not where your car is? The answer is that's where the light is. I see IT organizations very focused on what they're aware of and what they feel is in their control. And so they very, very carefully and detailed, come up with very careful and detailed roles, permission sets, and they're a little fuzzy on how their local area networks connect to the wide area network, when in fact the vast majority of the attacks they're going to see come from outside. But they can't really control the way the internet comes into their organization. They can't control the way other people use it and where they bring their phones, what they connect to. So what I see is a lot of IT organizations saying we have triple locked down the things we know about, and we're not spending a lot of time thinking about what we don't know.
Right. So it's sort of a question of in this sort of predictable, earlier phase of before you start a cybersecurity program, you're really reliant on the IT organization to do IT security. They're just doing what it is that they know how to do. And there isn't really any necessary connection between what are the most important critical assets or services that the company has. Well, what are the biggest business consequences to a potential security incident? There's no real mapping towards the business-driven needs and the technology-driven measures that are in place. So that's a bit of a disconnect, and I think that's something that it's really our perhaps even unique approach to bridging that gap and filling that gap. But Ted, how does that connect with what you were talking earlier about belief versus faith?
A lot of people go with what's worked for them in the past, and sometimes that works, but more and more, due to artificial intelligence, the dark web, as it's called, the potential to be hacked could be greater than you can ever imagine it to be, and your past defenses are not sufficient for future-oriented threats. It's unrealistic for an organization that wishes to continue on, provide value, and be a legacy for its owners, its customers, and so on, to expect that what worked for them in the past is going to be sufficient for them in the future. And as human beings, it's very difficult to get out of the mindset that because you've been successful in the past, you will continue to be successful in the future. And so that's why what we want to have a conversation with you about at Pythia is how could we kind of help you work toward a future orientation for cybersecurity? And John, I think that gets back into your area.
Well, I think the point you made is a really critical one because I know, I and probably, most everybody's really guilty of this, where if things are going well and you believe that some of your efforts have been part of things going well, you tend to believe they're going to continue going in the same more or less positive direction. But at least with cybersecurity, that's just 100% unrealistic. I mean, more than 100%, because the threat environment around everybody has been evolving much quicker than how much any, except the very best funded organizations, can keep up. So if you think you've been doing like, the Alice in Wonderland, Red Queen's race, running fast to stay in place, it's actually worse than that. You're running at the same speed, but you're actually getting behind. And that's nobody's fault. I mean, it's just the way the world is working in terms of much better tools for adversaries, much larger numbers of adversaries because the tools are better and easier to use, and much more worked examples of adversaries making tidy sums of money, because that's really the main purpose of cybercrime. So I think the shift that you're talking about, Ted, is one where in addition to trying to say whatever resources you have for technical risk management, let's help you spend those resources to your best effect rather than just doing what the IT people happen to see under the street lamp that they very appropriately live under. So that's one thing. But I think in addition to that, it's also about a transition to a different set of, I won't say beliefs, but a different set of understandings that the prudent approach that any company, large, small, well-funded, not so well-funded, any company has to take is twofold. So first, get a realistic assessment of what is most at risk from cyber attack in your business and what's the most effective ways in the short term of protecting it. That's one. And then the other one is get away from the standing still or doing the same old stuff, but instead get on an ongoing process to periodically reassess your risks and your threats based on how your business has grown and hopefully thrived, so that you can grow your cybersecurity program to meet the growing needs of your company. That's not going to come from IT people doing their very best, because their very best doesn't grow with the company. And that's not going to come from any other part of the company, except the executives and leaders that know how the company has been or hopes to be growing. So it's a kind of a growth oriented, and I happen to think kind of a more hopeful approach. Once you get over the hump of saying everybody is vulnerable, nobody can be invulnerable. Not the biggest company in the world, not the best funded government organization. Everybody's vulnerable. And once you get over that uncomfortable position, then I think it's actually a hopeful position to be in, to say we can understand what our risk is, and we can figure out what are our most prudent ways to manage the risk that we have. So having struck a positive note, Ted, I want to bat it back to you for a minute to say, what does it look like for an organization that didn't make that transition, and maybe actually was unfortunate enough to have an incident, but actually did not prepare adequately, did not move forward from an IT-centric approach, hasn't really done, holistic corporate risk management, hasn't figured out what their regulatory liability is or the business risk. So there's a word that we sometimes use, due care. So we're trying to get people to exercise due care over their business. But for those who don't get that segue, what does it look like to them, if and when, hypothetically, some incident really did happen?
Well, they feel
I'll give
awful.
that to you, Ted, first, because I want you to talk
Yeah.
about it from the organizational viewpoint, and then Brendan from the viewpoint of the very well-meaning people in the IT organization who have been doing their best but didn't prevent an incident. So maybe you two guys could sort of deal with the downside a little bit after my sort of positive view.
Well, it's, unfortunately, I'm going to start being the downer here. And I really like, John, how you set us up to think optimistically.
Well, we'll come back to it.
Okay. The reason why we want to think optimistically is because we're all too familiar with what happens when there is a cyber attack that is successful, an organization is held for ransom, information, property is stolen or destroyed. It's survivor experience. You feel awful. You feel that you've been attacked successfully. You're not safe, because with all the gadgets and doodads that we have that are wired, you don't know where that malicious code has been placed, when it's going to blow up, when it's going to take down your process at a time when you least expect it. And because there is that unease and feeling of insecurity, you've got an organization that is entirely focused on saving itself as opposed to serving its customers and its business goals. And because of that, you've got different parts of the company that are disunited, fighting for their own turf. They're not using the same process. Some will just shut down. People will leave. It's a very bad situation to be in. And you see this with a lot more frequency than you might see, buildings fall down or what have you. If we thought about the proportion of organizations that have had a cybersecurity incident, it would be difficult to comprehend. So from a behavioral and emotional perspective, you got to focus on getting through that and preparing yourself so that you've done what you can do, and that's the best case scenario that you've prepared for.
Well, from the technology side, it's mostly just bitter frustration. Someone has done something that they shouldn't have done, or someone has found a flaw in something you rely on and exploited it. And once you get on that treadmill, it's hard to get off. Once you start being reactive, then you spend a lot of your time as a firefighter rather than as someone who's trying to actually make the world a safer or better place. There's also a two-part thing I wanted to ask the two of you that comes up that technologists don't like to talk about, which is that often we're plodding along doing our thing. Someone does something that they shouldn't have, either innocently inside the organization or maliciously outside the organization. And suddenly, everything is obvious in retrospect. We're made to feel defensive. How did you not know that there was a buffer overflow in our sink? And the answer is, never thought about it. Why would I? But that's not the time. You can't say to your colleagues, how dare you? So what I wanted to talk to you guys about, one of the two things, one of the reasons when we put Pythia together, I thought that we had a real chance to do something different, is from my perspective down in the server farm, the two things we don't have as tools in the technology toolkit are the policies, so the sorts of things that are John's expertise, or the personal relationships, because it's very frustrating to say, this piece of hardware failed. The person who manufactured it, who is not me, is to blame. I don't understand why you're whipping me for this in public, and I don't understand what you want me to do about it. I don't make hardware. But you're not allowed to say to people, listen, we need to back up here. You need to understand, because in a crisis, you're supposed to be fixing it. So that's what I always, that was my big thing I hope to get from the two, working with the two of you is work before the problem, before your hair's on fire, so that policies, so that when you go to your senior manager, you don't have to have a conversation about who needs to be crucified, because they understood that this was a risk and we have a plan for it. And for the behavioral stuff for TED is how you get your colleagues to do more than take a step back and hope they don't get any of this disaster on them, but to do the things they need to do to help you. Because I got to say, having been in this situation, a lot of times people take two steps back and go, "You go, IT, God bless you," as long as you're not the person who's being publicly whipped for whatever incident occurred.
Well, I'll take a first stab at that because I think it's probably a little bit briefer than Ted's. There's really only three scenarios, to just oversimplify, perhaps. The situation that you're talking about, Brendan, there's been an incident. The IT people are, rightly disgruntled and, all this stuff. They've been doing all the things that they know how to do. One case is the organization does not really have a cybersecurity incident response plan. And boy, you never want to be there because when something happens, all that disarray that you and Ted spoke about absolutely happens, and it's really hard to pick up the pieces and get out of that reactive mode. Second case is there is something that some people think is a cybersecurity incident response plan, but it's been gathering dust for a while, hasn't been reviewed, hasn't been, for lack of a better word, war gamed or tabletopped. I mean, tested out in concept, and hasn't really been updated. It's like, if it's been like 2 years, as little as 2 years, the world has moved on. Your organization is more at risk, and your organization has moved on and may have more that's at risk. So you have a plan, you have an incident response plan, but it's not really adequate for your needs. And then the third case is, very mature organization with a good cybersecurity program, regularly keeps its incident response plan up to date. That's great. If your organization is one of those, then we can help you in different ways than the first two. But those are the table stakes, right? I mean, there's all sorts of other kinds of preparedness, but from the perspective of an IT organization that's getting blamed for an incident, those are the critical distinctions. But in terms of how do you take a leadership group within a company and get them to understand that they also have responsibility for deciding which risks to actively manage, that's a trickier one. That's one that I've failed at repeatedly in years of consulting, but I think that's really more Ted's area of expertise.
Well, it's interesting listening to both of you discuss your views, that what I think if anybody listening to this thought about it, what you notice is that you've got disparate systems, managers operating under different assumptions, different equities. They're not united. And one of the key responsibilities for a leader in a cybersecurity organization is to make cybersecurity everybody's business, not because cybersecurity itself is, let's say, what you get paid to do, but you do get paid to execute the function of your business unit. And if your business unit is unable to function because it has been successfully attacked, then it is your business, right? So what you're hearing in the conversation is that a lot of the opportunities for thieves or malicious actors to disable an organization come when the organization does not have a common focus, is not practicing common security guidelines, is relying on past successes or past ways of doing things as their future orientation, and is not actively managing for the potential of a cybersecurity attack. Given the variety of tools that are out there, AI bots, dark web actors, people who have access to the internet and can code a little bit, you cannot rely upon past approaches to be sufficient for the future. Just as your business opportunities have changed, your cybersecurity operation needs to change too. And at this point, what I'd like to do is invite you, as someone watching this, listening to this conversation, to contact us at pythiacyber.com and let us know which conversation you'd like to continue that would make the most business sense for you and create value for your organization. And with that, thank you very much.